Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Insurance Unlimited podcast sponsored by Endava. I'm Paul Willoughby, your host, and today I am very fortunate to have Jeff Cohen, the Senior Vice President at Zywave, with me. Jeff, you and I have known each other for a long time. Welcome.
We have, Paul. It's great to see you again. Thanks very much for including me on this program.
No problem. Whereabouts are you in the world today?
I am talking to you from 96th Street on the east side of Manhattan.
Oh, fantastic. Very nice, very nice. So, Jeff, in these podcasts, I generally drag people into the world of insurance quite quickly. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about whether you chose to come into insurance or did you accidentally fall into insurance like the rest of us?
I would say sort of half and half, Paul. I graduated from university in 1987 and moved to Manhattan to be closer to my fraternity brothers and my girlfriend at the time, who's my spouse, and started working for Bloomberg when that business was very small, probably less than 200 people, and fascinated not necessarily by the financial markets, by the process of reviewing data and how information can be presented to help decision makers come to a conclusion rather quickly. Certainly that company grew extraordinarily, and Mike Bloomberg became mayor in 2001. I left the business in 2003 and joined with a group of people that had started advising just a few years earlier with this idea of sort of approaching the commercial insurance markets in a very similar way that Bloomberg approached the financial markets. Now, over time, and I spent 17 years at advising, over time, I would suggest that the idea for the commercial insurance marketplace ended up being very different than the way the financial markets are approached. And we migrated very quickly to collecting data and allowing our customers to present that data in different ways to their end parties. And we could spend your entire podcast talking about the differences between the commercial insurance markets and the financial markets. Let's just put that aside. Maybe you'll decide that it's ripe fodder for another segment. Who knows? But in the interim, we sort of put our energy into delineating how much insurance do businesses buy. How much umbrella does a construction company buy? How much D&O does a public company buy, and so on? And then tracking loss events separate from claims. So economic loss events. Now, ultimately, commercial insurance buyers probably make decisions around, how much coverage does everyone else like me buy? I should buy the same. Realistically, as we took this further, it really became, what are the reasons why everybody's buying this coverage? And that for us became the dominant data set of loss events. Loss events for us are all the various things that businesses do that creates big severity. So again, I'm thinking very specifically around low frequency, high severity, as opposed to high frequency, low severity. Those high frequency, low severity events happen all the time in the working world. I hurt my back, a slip and fall, a fender bender, all of these things happen with some sort of predictability.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
the big catastrophic things that cripple businesses, the factory fire, the product liability fiasco, the sexual harassment, the cyber breach. Those types of things have a devastating impact on, an income statement balance sheet at the end of a quarter. And so we pushed and pushed along this path of trying to create the biggest database possible of all of these types of low frequency, high severity, catastrophic events, such that you could twist a kaleidoscope and say, well, for things that look like this, what types of things would happen? And there are so many interesting applications for this data. We spent most of our efforts working on the collection of it, with the idea that our customers would spend most of their effort in terms of, taking the utilization of it forward.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because for me, this whole fascination with data, it feels very recent. It feels like, everybody's strategy in the last couple of years has been, we need to consume all of this data. Yeah, I came across Advisum when I was working at Lloyd's nearly 14 years ago, I think it was. You had this extremely rich data set, but I think a lot of the practitioners probably couldn't get their head around, like, did they trust the data? Like, you've got to trust it before you exploit it. Like, how have you seen this change over your career?
Well, there are a lot of aspects of that question that we need to unpack. So at Advisen, we built this thing up to a level that our small company could muster. We sold the business to Zywave in November of 2020. So I'm part of the senior leadership team at Zywave, and Zywave has plowed resources into it at a level that we could never afford to at Advisen. Yeah. Today, we have more people working on this thing offshore and onshore than ever before. We've changed completely the technology infrastructure on the back end that allows us to sort, manipulate, and add fields, which is probably one of the most important things as you build a data set like this. You have to have the ability to make it more and more granular, because there's some underwriter in some corner who's saying, well, what about these details? Do you track that?
Yeah.
That's interesting. Maybe we should. And so you have to have this, ability to stretch the data set, not just by adding more and more rows to this imaginary, million row spreadsheet, but more and more columns of things and relating them back and forth to one another. One of the coolest things I think that we've done, one of the parts that I'm most proud of, is we've taken all of our loss events and not only mapped them back to a company, and that company is mapped back to a hierarchy. So you could see, show me everything involving Disney or any of its subsidiaries, show me anything involving Walmart or Home Depot, or pick whatever, giant, company on the globe that you want to look at. But we've also taken these loss events and rooted them back by cause of loss. So, you think about, things from the reinsurance perspective of impacting a portfolio. A pebble gets thrown into the pond and it has these ripple effects. Deepwater Horizon is a loss event, but it has a D&O, ripple. It has a pollution liability, several ripples. It has all of these product ripples, and all of these things are all mapped back together by that common cause of loss. No different than, Bernie Madoff or Takata airbags or wildfires in California. You name the cause and you can see how loss aggregates around different companies, different lines of business, sometimes even geographies. It's really interesting. So that nuance is one of my favorite aspects. I would suggest ultimately that what we've been doing is we're not actually tracking claims. We are tracking economic loss events. So the source material for this is, jury verdicts and SEC filings and FOIA requests and anything where we could come up with a document that says, this is where this is why this number in this field is this way, because it's substantiated by that source document. So here's the next thing, Paul, that I think, going back to your question of, how does the insurance community embrace this, dovetails around this notion of what I'm going to explain to, sort of our listeners, is around this idea of Venn diagrams, right? If I'm the insurer, I know what I know. Classic. I know everything that I've, paid a claim on. And I have another circle in my Venn diagram, which is everything that's been submitted to me that I chose not to write. So I know of some other loss experience. I probably worked at some other shops. So there's another Venn diagram circle here, which is, my prior experiences and, my hunch building. I don't like that. What we're doing is we're creating a really big circle around all of this, which is, this is sort of the best we can do with regard to publicly known events across all different sources compiled in a structured database so you could overlay it on top of things. And for me, this is the utility of context. I'm 58 years old. I live in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I've been married to the same person for 30 some odd years. And periodically my spouse will suggest that I'm an overweight husband. And I try to counter this notion as much as I can. And my latest retort is that if you really want to compare Jeff Cohen to other husbands, you have to get some data, which means you have to look at other people that live on the Upper East Side, that match my demographic, that have all of these different things, put us all out on a spectrum. And here's Jeff and here's everyone else. Now you have context to see whether or not Jeff is an example of one side of the spectrum or the other. As it turns out, as I argue all the time, and this doesn't work, my spouse only has one data point that she's comparing to nothing. So like, there's no context here. And what we're offering with our data set is a tremendous amount of context. For example, is that cyber breach and the fines and the penalties and the response cost and litigation, all that stuff, is that a big example or a small example?
Yeah.
And when it comes to looking at transportation companies and types of things that could go wrong, are these large? Are these small? What types of things do you like? As you construct your policy form, what wordings might imply this as an outcome versus that? How do you avoid the things that have already happened? So for me, this value of context becomes this ability to really hone in on the risk selection, risk segmentation. What's my appetite? What am I really looking for? And what do I want to try to avoid? And then I can overlay this idea of, well, what are the claims that I've had direct check writing experience with? And have I been paying the really egregious ones, or have I been paying small ones on the side that I'm rather proud that I, missed those other ones, type of thing? And for me, that all comes to fruition in the notion of context.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think to your wife's point, I started using Asana a few years ago, which was without data, you're just giving me your opinion. And
exactly.
the reason that came about, and I think it's a pretty famous saying, was that, I was a head of innovation. I was an ideas guy. I generally have 50 ideas a day. And then I would keep taking them to my executive team and they'd be like, yeah, but where's the proof? Like, give me the data. And so that was when I started learning about quantitative and qualitative data. But that's especially when I started learning about using third parties, right? Because innovation in a large insurance company, you wanted to do it all yourself in case your ideas got out. And what about this amazing product we're about to launch? Is anybody going to want to buy it? That was a fundamental question. And actually, as insurers, we're so inwardly focused, we don't go out and get the data. And I've noticed the last few years, people want that data. They want those proof points. They've started asking the client more about what it is they need. And we are much more curious about what's available and what data is available. And is that you guys were ahead of the game? Are you seeing more curiosity or more inquisitiveness in with your partners?
Yeah, Paul, absolutely. The advent of the MGA space, the growing volume of premium in the excess and surplus segment. These things are enormous boosters for that type of data review, data approach. I would submit that one of the most interesting conversations we get to have today is around that new insurance capacity front that has just opened, where we believe, but we don't have the data, but we believe there is a great opportunity here. The trouble for us is we believe, but we don't have data. We have no claims because we haven't written anything. We are theorizing. We have a premise. We need to prove it. And by the way, we need to go back to that carrier to show them that these types of things could happen, but not those types of things.
Yeah.
So for us, that's been a really interesting way to harness the utility of this loss data to help the creation of what I would call not just insurance product, but insurance capacity. The notion of new product development will always be there, because inevitably there's an underwriting manager that says, no, I don't like that. But wait a minute, let us show you the types of losses that have happened. And here are 5,000 examples, but none of them get to a level where the hairs on the back of your neck should get like, form some visceral opinion, and it's like, oh, okay. So, data helps in many ways to evolve those new product ideas. I think in some similar facets, you've got the notion that data is also helping to refine policy language and contractual clauses, because, we like it up to this level, but we're not willing to go to here because of this event and that event. I should underscore one point that comes across when you approach data from the public domain, and that is that all of the names of the companies involved are already in the public record. So for our biggest brokerage clients that also harness this data, mostly to help their large insureds, their large policyholders understand how big a loss could be in this particular type, they're pointing to the peer company across the street that actually, incurred this event, because it's all in the public domain. There's no PII here. There's no, it's completely disclosed. So whereas, a very large brokerage might, adhere to their obvious fiduciary responsibility not to divulge a claims scenario from a different client, this data gets utilized in place of that to help a large corporate or even a middle market company appreciate the scale of what could happen. Sure, this is the hot topic. Everybody is worried about this issue. But when you look at where the severity actually originates from, it's these other topics. So let's make sure we have a mitigation plan to address that before you go down a path of fear. And that works really well.
It's fascinating. I spent a lot of time talking to small SME business owners when we were launching an SME business a number of years ago. And actually what they were all looking for was data, benchmarking data. So companies like me, we called it that sort of data, because you get up to a certain size, a certain demographic of business, and then you want to know, if you own a flower shop in the middle of Manhattan, what's happening to all the other flower shops, right? What sort of risk are they seeing? What sort of growth are they seeing? Am I on par? Because it's human nature to be competitive. And actually, in that sort of segment, the data wasn't readily available. But I think with the world we're in now, with ChatGPT and different language models and the learning and at the pace of the learning, actually that's going to become more accessible to smaller, medium-sized businesses as the world moves on. But it comes back to this trust element, doesn't it? With your data, I know I can trust it because it can be referenced back to where you sourced it. Do you think we'll get down to sort of that level of data for mid-market, maybe even SME businesses?
Yeah, I do. And I'll start my comment by telling you that the fascinating thing that this data shows for individuals like me is that really big, heinous loss events can happen to very small companies.
Yeah.
And, human beings are remarkably adept at getting into trouble. And that doesn't mean that they have to only work at large global corporates. They could work at a flower shop. And and in so many ways, by our nature, human beings are pushing the envelope. But sometimes it gets pushed in a direction that could be catastrophic and cause great calamity. I will also, your flower shop remark reminds me that it's very important for the intermediaries, the brokers and the agents, to make sure that they're talking about pure data, because the flower shop doesn't want to be compared to a grocery store. Those are two very different things.
Yeah.
And so, again, this quest to make sure I have peer data, um, you know, has an equal impact for the underwriter as well as the policyholder when it comes to reviewing coverage and mitigating bad circumstances. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, part of the feedback we got when we were doing our research was we were looking at tech media businesses, but it was quite interesting. We put 10 tech media businesses in the room and interviewed them. One was a blockchain consultant and one built websites. And from an insurance perspective, they are risks. Their risk is perceived to be the same. They're on completely different level of scale of risk, and we're not very good at classifying those businesses and their activities down to the really referenceable levels. And I think a lot of insurers really struggle with that.
Yeah, I mean, you can see it, there are a number of insurers that haven't properly put their claims data into a database that you can twist the way I described my kaleidoscope. Let's filter by industry code. Let's filter by company size, employee count. All the different ways that you would want to distill down to that group of peers, the way my underwriter or policyholder wants to look at. There's a very telling aspect to this data. Once you have enough of it, which really becomes sort of helpful from my standpoint of how do you lower an organization's risk profile? And really where I would like to see data sets like this evolve in terms of not necessarily in terms of their structure, but in terms of how they're applied, right? Like using it to inform underwriting, powering a predictive model. I would suggest that, that's the most obvious, 101 level of utility for this type of data. How do you improve a, underwriting outcome? How do you improve a loss ratio, a combined ratio? All of these things come from better risk selection. Very straightforward. I'd really like to see the future evolution of application here with regard to insurers taking both their claims data, organizing it, getting it to a level. By the way, same thing is true with submission data. That's just another layer. That's another level of difficulty. But let's take claims data, because we're processing all of that, and then applying it, in addition to the claims we paid, here are other things that have happened. So now let's somehow summarize this, take it back to the policyholders, basically to say, don't do this.
Yeah.
These things led to these loss events, training, technology, all of these different ways to avoid showing up on this list. Here are the common factors. We took these apart. Don't do this. Just do this. And my view is, by doing that, insurers get another bite of that combined ratio apple in terms of lowering the preponderance of claims, essentially making those policyholders smarter after they've signed on for the policy.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? If this is a D&O policy, here are the 10 things that we see all the time in our losses. This, and this. I'm going to give that back to you as a checklist, things to avoid and things to think about. I could work, in conjunction with your broker to help make sure that you have a program that addresses these things so that we don't see it as a claim and you don't see it as a loss amount.
It's a really interesting concept too, that whole thought leadership piece. One of my personal lines insurers recently sent me messages because we were experiencing windstorms, but actually the advice they gave me was fantastic, and I'd never experienced anything like it before. It was really down to the detail. If you've got this type of roof, then consider this. If you've got a hot tub, then make sure the cover's secured. It made me think about the sort of level of thought leadership we actually provide as large, complex reinsurers and insurers to our clients. And I don't think anybody's really nailing that in the way that they should. And I think a lot of it is this question about whether whose responsibility is it, but I think you've just hit the nail on the head. Partner with your broker, make your broker look good, feed them the data, feed them this thought leadership, and allow them to sort of interact with the client with that data. And I think that's what gets you that trust and that advocacy from the client.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that there's a whole range of improvement that can happen when the manufacturers collaborate with the distributors in this way, right? I think about, I don't know, the automobile industry, and you have the manufacturers and the dealerships, and sort of the tie up around safety, driving improvement, and all of these different things. And for me, there's an opportunity for the insurance community on the carrier side to tie in with the brokers to advocate around simply avoiding things that have already happened. Back to that casebook of precedent. Once we start looking at all the big flower shop losses, we see that all of these things are related to roses. I'm making this up, of course, but if that's the case, let's talk about ideal rose handling procedures and policies to make sure that your employees and your customers are thinking about these things as they choose roses. Again, using it has a very poor analogy, but you get the idea.
No, we don't. Definitely, I can definitely see the link there. I've got a final question for you, Jeff. So it's rapidly coming up to the end of 2023. What are you hoping to see in 2024? What's on the New Year list for you?
Oh, business-wise, there's plenty on this. I'm very into, taking an organization's appetite as it gets formed, right? What is your appetite? Helping to distill what do you like and what do you not like? Which risks are you looking for, and which risks are you vehemently opposed to? And connecting that to the brokers in terms of augmenting distribution. What Zywave is doing is probably impacting, 3 deliberate buckets when it comes to the insurance company, right? One bucket, absolutely risk selection, risk segmentation. Another bucket is distribution, where you have 15,000 brokerages and agencies in the United States, all of them on our Zywave platform. That represents a tremendous amount of distribution power once a carrier delineates an appetite.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I'm really developing a number of views about ways for insurance companies to help policyholders become less risky once they're clients. And those are the clients you really want to keep. Those clients that never really had a claim. They pay their premium. They get notifications of renewal dates. How do you help those clients appreciate the new things that are happening that they should be careful about? And by the same token, how do you help other clients that are experiencing claims lower their risk profile? And for me, a lot of this comes back to what we've been talking about this whole session around. Let's talk about the things that have tripped up all the other companies ahead of me. And so I'd like to see greater plays to harness that approach to thinking.
Yeah, I think you've touched on 2 of my absolute soapbox moments there, really. One is the sort of the value of the client. Who are my valuable clients? Are they doing the things that we're asking them to do? Are they advocates of our business? Do they like us? They're all things that insurance companies should be looking at the data to understand, and they don't. They just go for more clients, and then more clients and more clients. And actually, I think I think the world is changing. I think the customer experience, the way that we treat our clients, is going to become number one strategy for 2024. I think my prediction is there's going to be more client engagement needed. I think, and to the second point that you mentioned as well, this kind of risk mapping piece. I've been representing a few NGA founders lately who are looking for capacity, And it is an absolute minefield trying to understand which insurer wants to write which business. And there's, I think it's, everybody assumes it's really clear and it's transparent from their websites. It is not. You almost need a service for that, and that's where the broker comes in. But where do you start is the challenge.
100%, 100%, and helping the insurer to appreciate that an area where they don't have claims experience could be a very profitable area to operate, but you don't have the claims experience either. You just have a couple of stray data points. How do you put all of that together? And I think that's where some of this data manifests itself, to be able to come back to that carrier and say, hey, let's go into this together for these reasons.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating for product development teams to listen to you and to understand sort of the business model, because I think, as I said, specifically my background is the Lloyd's market, but I've worked with lots of US insurers. We're too inwardly focused, and if you've got all this extremely valuable data, we can get more products to market, right? We can stop our clients out innovating us. My hypothesis is that they're developing products faster than we can insure them, and we've got to start getting ahead of the game. So I'd love to. We'll follow on. We're running out of time. We will follow up on that, because I think you and I could sit over dinner and talk about that for hours.
No doubt.
Wonderful. Well, Jeff, I'd love to say thank you very, very much for sparing the time. And it's been a really thought-provoking podcast for me. A few of my key passions in there. So thank you very much for your time.
Paul, thank you. Great to see you.